Hello, 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 and welcome back to part 2 of our top 10 films of the year 2024. This episode of Cannesversations was recorded on December 30th, 2024, with Lawrence Garcia, Öykü Sofuoğlu, Patrick Fay, and Eliana and Patrick. Please check out our show notes if you'd like to find out more or connect with any of us. And happy Year of the Snake. Now, without any further ado, here is the second part.
So, my number 5 is Roberto Minervini's The Damned. This film has been described as Minervini's quote-unquote first fiction feature. I think it's a bit of a weird designation because his documentaries already have a very strong performative element. And in this film, but what's distinct about this film is that he's following a bunch of soldiers, Union soldiers during the Civil War, and so it's clearly like a reenactment in a way that his other films are obviously not. But I think what's interesting about this film is that it still preserves, I think, some of the things that I find interesting about his films is that they're really not structured around dramatic incident. They're really structured around the kind of more experiential feel of being in a particular place at a particular time, in a particular setting. And so the focus here is not really on what this band of soldiers is meant to do. It's more just about how they move through the space, the kind of very detailed depictions of behavior, like them loading a gun or a couple of kids wrestling, just the kinds of things that you wouldn't see in a normal war drama, and maybe not even in war reportage for that matter. I guess continuing that theme that we started with about war photography. I mean, one easy way to describe it is that it's kind of about a film about that Minervini would have made if he were alive, during the Civil War. And I think that's a kind of interesting extension of his project.
Did anyone else see that here? Okay, so yeah, I have seen that too. I really like this film. This is one of the films that just seem to fall off, over discourse, because I remember that I really like this film. It's really also, we hear so much about Ukraine, Middle East, and so on. Like, we have this war in our daily life through coverage, at least. And this film speaks to, the lived reality, and it sort of creates the mundanity of it while intertwining it with deeply existential questions. So, I really like that film as well. I just sort of really forgot about it, That's just how it happens sometimes if you see so many films. But yeah, Lawrence, let's just go on.
So my number 4 is a film. It's an Indian film called Kottukali, probably pronouncing that poorly, but it's also been translated as The Adamant Girl. So it was a film that was at Berlinale earlier this year, I think, by P.S. Vinothraj. I think his previous film, Pebbles, was at Rotterdam. And in any case, this film, it's basically set just in one day, very temporally limited film about a family who decides to visit have some sort of religious ritual to cast out the spirit that they think has possessed one of their young daughter, the daughter, who is supposed to marry a man in this arranged marriage, but she has fallen in love with someone from a different case. And so that's the setup of the film. And we just sort of follow them as they bring this young woman, to have this sort of ritual performed on her. And along the way, you just see the violent actions of the person she's going to marry. And there's the whole family gathered around them. I find it actually quite hard to describe what I find interesting about this film, but just because it's just his style is very original. There's lots of aerial shots. There's a lot of just follow shots through following the people. The action is very clearly delineated, but it's also spread across different people. So there's not really any identification kind of figures. I guess the thing that jumps out to me and that I find I can articulate is that there is a kind of equivalence made between the roosters that are used in this sort of ritual, who are eventually sacrificed in this ritual, and the woman who is being essentially sacrificed to be married to this, what seems like a crazy, violent man. And while in a different film, you would have this kind of metaphor and it would be this very heavy-handed kind of thing. What I find interesting about this film is that this almost metaphorical relation between the rooster and the woman doesn't feel heavy-handed in this way. And I'm not entirely sure how he does that exactly. I know, Patrick, you've seen this film, maybe?
Yeah. Did anyone else? Okay, I'm sorry again. I was especially taken by the ending of the film and the opening shot. Those two frame it really, sublimely, I think. The ending was sort of, I talked to a friend of ours, I won't name their name now, but I think they didn't quite catch what was going on in that ending. Sort of was a bit confused about it, but there is some sort of magic realism element in the ending that I think was very thought-provoking. And I think when I look back at that film, I think especially of that ending and how it sort of reshapes your outlook on the entirety of the film that you saw before that. So good pick.
So,
and Lawrence, I'm sorry, you have to go on.
So my next pick is, I think, one that you also have, or it's The Periphery of the Base by Zhou Tao. Was, I think, in Berlinale also, which is making me think that I have a lot of Berlinale films, actually, even though I didn't go. It's a sort of, I guess you could call it a kind of experimental documentary about this like infrastructure in somewhere in the Gobi Desert. And it's just sort of about the scale of this project and the sort of inability to capture the entirety of the scale of the project and the sort of the human labor involved in it is how I would describe it. So the title is The Periphery of the Base. The idea is that we only ever see part of this like large project. And I think the film plays in different ways with that. I think, Öykü, you have this film as well.
Yeah.
Maybe you can say more about it.
Do you want me to jump in? I think what I found interesting was that, like, it can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe it can also be described as a structural film in the way it plays with the scale of the vision, like the micro and macro levels. But it plays with also dealing with these more social and environmental aspects of what he's filming. So it's not just like the vision itself, but that vision, the field of vision we have, contains elements that are not necessarily coming from a structural film. Like it's not devoided from the meaning. We can still find the hierarchies and exploitation that is also going on in these spaces. So I think it's a really contemporary film in a way, in the sense that it both uses the form, but it never puts away what is being represented. Like it's really engaged in the world. So I think what I understand from our vision today, like in a really conceptual term, is that like the vision itself, but it's also englobing what is going on in the world, not totally away from it. Because in experimental filmmaking, I think that we have these two veins of making cinema, experimental cinema. And I think The Periphery of the Base is in the middle of those two veins. And it kind of plays with them so masterfully. It's as if mirroring mirroring your own trajectory while you're watching the film, because there are moments that you kind of lose what you are looking at that moment. Like, am I looking at something big, or is it something really small? Like this changes in the perception happens so seamlessly that when you realize what you are looking at, you're like, wow, when did that happen? So that these amazements, these fascinations while watching the film really stay with me.
Yeah, I like that description a lot. Is that it's like a kind of structural film that doesn't forget the sort of social context in which it's made. And partly that has to do also with the sense of scale, which is that it's like in the structural film, there is a sense in which you know what elements are making up the structure. But here, partly because of the shifts in scale, you never know kind of what will become of importance. Like in one scene, it might be the people. In one scene, it will be the dust. In one scene, it will be something else, right? And so that kind of play is I think, as you said, quite masterful.
Did you see that too, Eliana? Okay, yeah. I was just, but we can't go into that now. But I find it at least noteworthy here that the movement overall at the end goes away from that social context, right? The direction goes towards something transcendent. And I don't know how I feel about that overall, but I think the initial reaction I had to it felt very profound. But I would like to, engage with that more to see what that means, what the implications are of that turn in direction away from the laborers and so on. But yeah, we can't delve into that now. So let's go to Silver. Lawrence, what is your number 2?
So my number 2 is Bruno Dumont's L'Empire, or The Empire, which I'm a bit surprised. I guess that I think it's not very well loved. I mean, to be fair, I was a Bruno Dumont skeptic until relatively recently with France, the Léa Seydoux movie from 2021. But ever since then, I feel like I have went back to his filmography and started to really appreciate what he's done. And L'Empire for me was an extension of this sort of really ambitious but also very playful thing that he does. And I think what I find most interesting about this is, well, if you don't know anything about a film, it could be described as a kind of Star Wars spoof, but set in the region that he always films in, and somewhere in the south of France, I believe, or in the north of France. Is it the north of France? Yeah. And I think what I find most interesting about this film is that it's this big battle between good and evil, but what the emphasis is on how this sort of battle must be sort of embodied in some form. And so in the film, what you get is a really strong contrast between almost a kind of quasi-documentary elements and the very heavy CGI that you would find in in a Star Wars production. There's an early scene where you just see a fisherman and the winch that is pulling his boat back onto this the wheel sort of thing, and the sort of the concreteness and the weight of those kinds of images, and the way that Dumont films this region of France, and the way that contrasts with this very almost weightless CGI imagery. I find a very interesting contrast between his sort of interest in bodies and that sort of documentary element and this kind of Hollywood spectacle. I think another way that you see that come out is that there is a child that's at the center of the film, and he's supposed to be the sort of embodiment of all evil that one side wants to kill, and that the other side, the bad side, wants to protect, obviously. So, but what's interesting about the baby is she's obviously just a baby, and when you see the shots of the baby, it's just a kind of almost quasi-documentary element. It's just a literal toddler. And so when he's there and he's supposed to be at the center of this Manichaean battle between good and evil, but at the center it's literally a baby. And you sort of have to contend with that in all these different forms. I guess thoughts on this film, because I know you've seen it, I'm pretty sure. Öykü?
Yeah, I don't have many memories of it, actually. I feel it's not a film that really stayed with me after Berlinale. I don't know. I remember while watching it, I was quite enjoying it, but maybe there were other films that were stronger than L'Empire that I didn't give much afterthought. And I feel it's also, I think, is connected. Sometimes I was feeling that I was projecting things that Dumont doesn't necessarily have in mind while making the film. So I was I kind of maybe limited myself with my reading to the film. And maybe that's why I kind of stopped thinking about it.
Did you see that, Eliana? Oh, sorry. Sorry that you have this position at the moment, but it's going to change. It's going to change soon. Yeah, for me, that's another film that just fell off. I really like that film. I think especially there's this sort of thread for me that I like narratives that forget about their narratives or seemingly forget about their narratives, because it's incredible how well made this film is. So you have, for instance, this incredible sex scene in the fields where I think, for one, the characters forget about their role in the movie. So they just give themselves into the moment of, the coitus. But at the same time, we have sort of the narrative that forgets about itself, We're just drawn into this moment. And I think it's so weird, but this is actually such a good sex scene that we see so rarely in cinema. And here it's embedded into this spoofy film. Yeah, I really liked it. I really like films that play with this idea of narrative and where to go from one point, and yeah, so I really like that one as well. I just don't, I just don't know why it didn't. I think if there are so many films, you just sometimes forget about films. That's how it works, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to give a more context for the sex scene, because I think it may sound a little goofy when you describe it like that. I mean, part of the idea is that there's this there's this big battle between good and evil, right? But these supposedly these spirits or whatever are they sort of almost possess these townspeople. And so the sex scene happens between these two people from the other sides who are kind of in conflict. But again, it's that contrast between this sort of idea that, oh, this is a manifestation of good and evil, but then they have to be embodied in some form. And so that sort of carnal element takes over. Dumont apparently described this film as a prequel to his earlier film, La Vie de Jésus, or The Life of Jesus, which I think is a kind of hilarious thing to do. But that movie also has a lot of sex scenes in fields that I think serve a similar function, but in relation to a slightly different narrative, or a very different narrative, I should say. But yeah, good movie. I would recommend for any Dumont skeptics.
Yeah, so that is Bruno Dumont's L'Empire. And now we go to your number one, Lawrence.
So my number one is Alain Guiraudie's Misericordia, which I think, does everyone have this on their list? Or
I have it on my list. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. So
as well.
yeah. So I'm not sure what to say. I mean, I love Guiraudie, and this film, I think, to me, and I've written about this in a review, but to me, it was a kind of film that almost felt like a kind of spoof of The Trouble with Harry of all films, like the Hitchcock film. If you haven't seen it, I won't go into it, but I think what I love about his films is how he plays with the kind of, often in his films, you ask kind of what kind of world is this film that I'm in. So there's a scene later on where there is a person who becomes kind of paranoid about being investigated, and we see a scene where one of the police officers or these investigating officers is in his room sort of whispering into his ear. And, in a normal film, you would be like, okay, well, this is obviously a dream sequence. And initially he's unsure of whether this is a dream sequence, but it turns out that this is actually real. And so often in his films, he plays with this kind of dream imagery where there's often something that you imagine is a kind of dream and it would be impossible or very implausible in the world. But in the world of Alain Guiraudie, it actually happens. I think in his earlier films, what's the title? In one of his earlier films, you have a similar kind of thing where a man has a kind of nightmare about what's going to happen, a kind of paranoid dream about what's going to happen to him. And then the rest of the film almost follows that kind of paranoid dream. And so I think it's a sort of fluidity of you'd never know what to expect from an Alain Guiraudie film. And there's always this kind of shape-shifting thing that goes on. And that your idea of what the world is keeps on transforming is what I find most appealing about his film, and it's true of this film as well.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. When you just talk about what the world is, I just see I've only seen a few of his films, but I would say it almost feels like he's spinning the globe and everything is up for grabs. Desire, dreams, things are... the pansexuality of how he portrays desire as well. Specifically in MinerviniKottukali, and I greatly just enjoyed it. I mean, there's so much to go into, but I don't know if we have the time.
Maybe.
Oh, sorry. No, you go on, Öykü.
No, maybe the also how the sexual tension and the death drive are both present, and you never know which way their interactions between two characters might go. I like that tension a lot. It keeps you so much alive while you're watching the film. It's every moment, every micro interaction between characters are a moment of fascination. Everything can happen, and anything would be valid in that moment. And I like how he deals with these micro situations. And maybe the aspect that I really enjoyed and found really unique in the contemporary cinema was how he dealt with the moral questions. As maybe you said The Trouble with Harry, but I have had difficulties like creating a lineage between Guiraudie and someone else. Like in his cinema, for me, stands so unique. It has such a unique position in both French and international cinema. I kind of, maybe it's my ignorance, but I kind of hard time parsing the way through Guiraudie. I think he has a unique presence, and one of that aspect becomes from the moral questions he asks, especially in this film, to the audience. Like there's a scene with a priest near the cliff where they discuss the meaning of life, death, and like how it is worth go on living, and to embedded in a film, to have that scene in a film that has a plot about murder investigation. It's both works within the story, but also as a philosophical meditation about life, about choosing life. And I was so struck by that moment. Like it was unexpected, and it just like stayed so strongly in my mind. Like I still think about it, and I found it really unique to have that, like having such a strong moment as a scene separate from the story or whatever, but also within the story. Like, yeah, that's what I can say, I guess, for now.
Yeah, perhaps my 2 cents on this is also that, I was a bit reminded of the films of Ulrike Oettinger, just in the sense that her films seem to be inhabited by just the same people over and over again. You have a big city of Berlin, for instance, but you meet the same people again and again and again. And here also, this village basically, consists of or comprises 7 or 8 people or something, that's all. And I like this sort of the ways he explores the milieu there. And I also noticed that the main actor, Félix Kizil, he sort of resembles Guiraudie as well. They look fairly similar. And also, it seemed to me like the French, response to Barry Keoghan in a way. They look very similar to me. And maybe one little aspect that I want to note is that I like the rhythm very much of the film, the way just processes repeat, movements repeat on and on. And at the beginning, when we approach the village, we look through the car windows again and again. But once we arrive at the village, the windshield is stained, and I thought this was a very early indicator that returning to his home village here also means that he's going to be stained. It's at the same time a foreshadowing, but also like just an existential truth that if you return to your family, to your roots, to whatever it is, you won't get out of that without being stained. And yeah, I like that a lot. Anyway, I think, Lawrence, you'll have to
Yeah. Sorry, I have to
bid
dip
your
out.
farewell.
But it was nice talking again. But I will see you sometime next year, hopefully. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Great.
gotta go. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's move on to number 4. Öykü, what is your number 4?
It's Bluish.
On my number 6-ish.
Okay. Do you want to go first, Eliana? Because it was on your list first, so maybe...
Yes, I was recommended this film by Öykü. And it's one of these films, I think the number 6 for me is because somehow, and maybe it's just simply color-wise, I associate it with All We Imagine Is Light, even though it's different, just rather the blue, the blue tint. The film Bluish, however, is very delicate. It's very delicate. And I feel, even though I've watched it, in some ways, I've lived it, I've seen other people living it, there's this harmony and calm. There's this feeling of belonging and not belonging, to talk or not to talk, to interact, or rather be active or not to be active. And the film is shot in Austria, in Vienna, or...
Yeah, it's in Vienna, but we never told that it's Vienna.
We're never told it's Vienna. And I believe this is a place, is it that is foreign to the directors as well, or...
No, they're Austrian.
Oh, they're Austrian, okay. but there's a simplicity to this film in gesture and in quiet, understated humor. Within the first scene or so, we see one of the protagonists wake up and empty a hot water bottle into a plant. And I found this gesture so... It's a nothing gesture, but it just expresses some form of... The water is not fresh, but then the plant is also getting nourished and is being taken care of with such small care. It doesn't matter that the water is not fresh. There's this recycling aspect, and just things happen. I mean, like nothing happens, but everything happens type of film. And I think that's why, in some sense, I paired it with All We Imagine Is Light, because I had difficulty. I feel like my 6-1 to degree top films come from this idea of feeling, oh, this was just beautiful. And it's a word that I don't necessarily use, even though it's very hard then to verbalize what exactly is that beauty that I see or that I feel, even though there are other things that can interrupt such a viewing. But yes, how was Bluish for you, Öykü?
I think, as you said, like, I think it's like many people while watching it felt that these moments were also lived by them at some moment in their lives. But like they also went through like similar sensations, interactions of loneliness, of belonging in a urban setting, in a city setting. Yeah, I think initially the first thing that caught me, that made me really like this film, was on that level of feeling connected to these two protagonists through their loneliness, but also the way they interact with the world. I felt like they were my distant friends, like as if, I don't know, like it's a weird feeling, but sometimes you watch a film and say, oh, I could have been really good friends with that character. Like, it's a stupid thing to say, but you still feel really connected with them, even though they're like totally unaware of your existence. And that was my initial, I think, level of reading why I enjoyed the film. But it's also about how we are being in the world, like present in the world, because I think in our daily lives, if we have like a really routine and engaging daily lives, we kind of tend to ignore what is going around with people, with small gestures, as you mentioned. And I think this film made me like, but there are still days where I wake up and say, I'm going to be in the world today. I'm going to be aware of my surroundings and what is going on. And I think this film also kind of asks, or maybe like highlights, this awareness of being in the world, of living, of where, with whom, and that kind of interactions of being in the world through, I don't know, like a breathing game when you visit a doctor or in a swimming pool, like a small interactions through gazes, through touch, is really important in our lives and really important in cinema as well, because that's the basis of human interaction, right? And the way Bluish deals with those small micro gestures, micro interactions are really beautiful. And sometimes I think we can just say that it's beautiful and it can be enough to describe it, because the beauty comes from the way we interpret and the way we situate in our own experiences. And I think this itself, this way of describing it, is sufficient enough to make it worthwhile and important. I don't know if it makes sense, but like the way if a film is personally engaging, if it touches the audience on a personal level, but this becomes like a general thread, then it kind of fulfills what it's supposed to do, no?
Yeah, well spoken. A film I have not seen. I wish to catch up with that soon. Could you remind us of the director?
It's Lilith Kraxner and Milena Czernovsky. It's a filmmaker duo. And they also made another film called Beatrix, which is kind of like the antipode. Like it's like it's not antithesis, but visually while Bluish is quite blue, cold, European. This is more, Beatrix is more summer, Romer vibes, I'd say. French also.
Interesting. Okay. We'll move on to my number 4, which is a castration movie anthology number 1, Traps. This is a rare find, I think, for me at least. This is a film by Louise Weird.
Actually, it's pronounced Word.
Word. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I did not know that. Now,
but the filmmaker, I'm not sure. I saw has sort of chosen to spell their last name that way in order to make people potentially read it as
that's
weird.
Interesting. So, yeah, the irritation is even in how to approach her name, right? Yeah. This is a chosen name. Of course, this is a trans woman who gained a sort of cult status for her first short film. I don't know if it was the first short film, but it was one film that was within a very small circle, was celebrated a lot. It's called Computer Hearts in 2014. And this is a crowdfunded film. The first 2 parts are only, entailed so far. In the film, you can download from the artist website. You can give as much money as you like. And yeah, number 3 and 4 are set to be released in 2025. And yeah, Eliana, that was also on your list. So maybe, do you want to give us a tour through your emotions, your thoughts?
Where to begin? This is such a, in a way, a tour de force of a film. The first chapter alone is titled Incel Superman. And even if you look, I mean, I don't really know if I would say that the letterboxed synopsis is accurate, but I believe there's this self-deprecating humor that states another film where a transgendered woman wants to have a baby or it wants to, but this hasn't come up yet for the first 2 parts that we've seen. There's a rawness to the cinematic quality of the film. I think everything must have been done on early video digital cameras, even those perhaps shot within the last few years or so. And you really get into a milieu where transgender women, transgender men, people who are exploring the fluidity of their identity on a both physical and internal identity point of view are just present as friends. Yeah, no, the film itself is done in a very raw filmmaking style that uses an early digital form camera. There's a lot of low lighting setting. There are a lot of close-up shots. And we follow primarily in the second chapter a woman, the director, who is kind of has a bit of a caustic and spiky personality, but there's something in the way that she's driven that's very admirable or that very watchable. I think what's most interesting about the film is to see themes of transgendered women and transgendered society done in a way that is really presented by someone who is doing and taking to underground cinema and taking charge literally of the narrative that she wants to tell, while also interacting with our current absurdity. I mean, the incel supermen, we have basically characters that could live online that come out from, that we see in real life. There's a man who is a hopeless romantic to a degree, and he believes that he's doing the right things with his girlfriend. His girlfriend draws fan fiction, pornographic manga, and he reads her the forum boards of 4chan from the incel section. There's something about that seems both real and unreal. Just everyone's hopes or current understanding of I don't know, of just situations and the mediality of the internet and forums and what people are to believe, and everything is just, I wouldn't say concisely placed, but it's acted out and with a veracity that makes me sometimes, we have these cringe moments as well, or these awfully true moments where you can just see it's both the character, but it's also the society and the ideology that they've swallowed after all these years coming out into play. And I think the same goes also for the second chapter, to a degree, of how one is supposed to even perform or act or be in the role of what it means to be a transgendered woman or a transgender man. And there are elements of performance as well. The best friends, one of them is transitioning to a male or is having the top surgery, and he is in a band with another transgendered woman. Just a very different facet of taking on identity, yet it's still presented and it is very relatable.
Yeah, and
it's hard to be concise.
Yeah, and it's not taking the easy path here, right? We have this one friend of hers whom the protagonist, who's played by the director, she's sort of encouraging her friend to transition, and then this person sort of grapples later on in the film with this decision. So it's not taking the easy road here of just depicting this as a way of liberating oneself. It's also questioning that decision as well and displaying all the doubts. Weirdly, this film made me also, because I was recently reading a lot of Frederick Jameson, and he has this sort of juxtaposition inspired by Goethe as well, who once spoke of the novella as a form that is about an unheard event. And Jameson contrasts that to the novel, that the novel is about, the present and presentness, whereas something like a novella is something that is distant in the past and is sort of unearthed through the narration. And I feel like this is sort of the perfect encapsulation of a novel of presentness. This entire film, it's 4.5 hours long, and it's totally devoted to the moment, to the situation. It has these low-res aesthetics that Eliana already mentioned. That means you see a lot of pixelation. You cannot be quite sure what you see, and sometimes it plays with that in interesting ways. And in addition to that, you have this grunge soundtrack that is sort of the musical equivalent to the aesthetics that you see. So it's all very grainy but digital at the same time, and I think this is quite fascinating. And almost also, through these aesthetics, it sort of creates these contours surrounding the characters, so it sometimes even seems a bit graphic novel-esque the way it looks. Then it has these incredible moments. Just, I think I will forever think of this Dune scene, for instance, in that movie. It's just a moment when this one woman, she can't accept the fact that her best friend won't read Dune, and she has been waiting for 1 or 2 years, and this friend, always finds excuses not to read it, and then just suggests, "Oh, I could watch the movie," and then they go on a tangent about it. All the while, we see our protagonist, who's just in this place because she is trying to get her medication to
she's trying to get
hormones.
her hormones.
Exactly, yeah. And they're coming from Ukraine as well, and there is a war going on, so the supply is cut as well. And it's so funny to be embedded in this situation where the protagonist has to listen to this bullshit story, but this bullshit story is also funny to us. But at the same time, she is deprived of the medication she needs, so it's all so intricate. It's also layered. I think she finds great scenes overall. And it's really a hangout movie, but it follows this overall arc. And There is the log line embedded in the film that reads the fear of having no one to hold at the end of the world. And in a way, this is applicable to the first and second chapter we see here. So I have to pay tribute to Michael Sosinski here. Through him, I found out about this movie on Letterboxd. He logged it, and then I looked into this, and one of these great finds on the internet.
I wanted to ask you something, maybe like a contribution, because I haven't seen the film, but I'm really, really curious now. Like it's like definitely on top of my watch list. But while we were talking about the long form and the great American film, and since you mentioned the novel, it made me think of these like end of the century novels, like The Man Without Qualities, and how they were like contemporary to their time and the turmoils that the European society and countries were going through. And it made me think of like, instead of, I think the long form can be a really contemporary answer to, let me put it this way, like the long form in the sense of Hollywood, while it's really outdated. And I think the way you describe this film uses the long form in a really contemporary way, which we also saw in literature in the past. It's not to make it grandiose, but make it like a present in time.
Yeah.
Because that's what we were lacking in the sense of time, that it's so fragmented right now. I think the way we need to capture is through the length. And maybe this is a kind of a reaction to the contemporary thinking, making image, making meaning. And maybe that's why it's visionary without seeing it. This is my interpretation of the film, but I don't know what you guys would think about it.
No, I really like that, because I think this is where, for instance, the Brutalist falls short, because it tries so heavily to render this arc while totally neglecting the protagonist, for instance, about whom I at least could not find out much about him and his situatedness in the world. Whereas here, I feel the complete opposite. I know these characters. I feel like I have a strong connection to these characters and their lived reality.
Yeah. I feel also on the Brutalist, his character was positioned to be someone great. And that was the only reason why he was a great legend. I do think on paper, the character is also highly sympathetic. Adrian Brody's character and the performance is also a very decent performance. But whereas, and also interestingly, the Castration anthology film features an intermission. I don't know if we explicitly said that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should keep that in mind and note it down, your observation, to whether this is the answer.
Yeah, and I really
presentness.
Like how this intermission is embedded here as well, because we hear this grunge song, which has also lyrics that speak to the overall project here as well. Yeah, so that is my number 4, and Eliana's number. Could you remind me which one was it? Number 5, number 6,
number 7.
Okay, number 7. Great. Are there other number 4s, Eliana?
Lazzaro at Night.
Lazzaro at Night.
Oh.
Shoot.
So Lazzaro at Night is a film by Nicolas Pereda, who is a Mexican director. But I think he's Canadian-Mexican, or spends some time. I'm not sure either if he spends a lot of his time in Mexico or if he just flies down to shoot. I haven't seen his other films, but I quite liked Lazzaro at Night because the film spoke to me in that it made me think about that which we are familiar with fairy tale-wise. The film is roughly broken into 3 distinct parts, or 3 parts that almost start to quiver. And it initially starts with a couple who seem to be discussing whether they discuss their infidelity with the person with whom the woman is actually with. But then quickly, this becomes a bit of an absurd point that is dropped to a degree
because the person with whom the woman is actually with seems a little bit unfazed by the fact. And rather, the three are vying at the same time for a similar role in a director's film, which I think features one of the greater scenes of humiliation that I've seen this year. Even though it's still a minor scene of humiliation, but the core of it hits when it's contextualized properly, as these three are actors and the director believes in a very naturalistic approach to casting, where he repetitively says, oh, you can just drink a glass of water and I will already know whether you are if it's the right fit. The Lazzaro character is not necessarily meeting the criteria to appeal to the director, and so he begins to, in some sense, force his way through the door, which also leads to some amusing situations. And then later on, these three discuss. They share meals, they talk about their mothers, they talk about their initial moments meeting one another. And the sound and what we see happening on screen is not one of the same. Conversations from a past are relayed while we see what might be happening in the present moment. And finally, the film ends in a type of retelling or potentially interpretation or even original of the story of Aladdin, but per César Aira's text, influenced by that on El Realismo. And the repetition, the ideas of discussing excess, just enough. Is Aladdin smart to demand each time that he just has a meal? Or is he stupid? These sort of things kind of come into play, and I think it made me think a lot about just sufficiency, what is deemed sufficient, this habitual eating, but just also visually being able to see someone gorging themselves is also a pleasure to watch someone eat on screen for some reason for me. And then as it enters this reenactment / acting / magical realism territory, I think I was sort of transfixed by the film.
Yeah, I saw it too, and Öykü is shaking her head.
No.
Yeah. So I can just subscribe to what you said. I think it's a very simple arrangement at first, but it's very effective. It's very controlled, I think, and then it takes on this overarching maybe notion of taking the very presentness into something that is mythical and grander. And I like this contrast a lot. In that sense, it's somewhat similar to Kottukali as well. But yeah, I really liked it, and I will be looking forward to the next work of the director, who's apparently a professor at Berkeley. I don't know if that's still the case, but anyway, so this is Lazzaro at Night. Let's move on, I think, to number 3. Is that correct? Which is, for me, Grand Tour by Miguel Gomez. Does that appear anywhere else? Okay. Then I'm good to go, I guess. I cannot think about that film without thinking of Caught by the Tides. They seem to have a similar project going on, sort of first creating an archive as filmmakers and then doing something new with the material. Here we go. It's a fiction film. It's a feature film centered on Edward Abbott in 1917, 1918. He's this colonial officer, this Englishman, but of course they all speak Portuguese in the film. And what does he do? Well, the basic premise is he's trying to escape his
fiancée.
Fiancée, Molly Singleton, to whom he's engaged. But he hasn't seen her in years, and as she sees her ship arrive, he hops on the next ship and flees her and goes on this grand tour through different countries in Asia. Yeah, just as fascinating as I think the way the way you can think of this approach overall is how this film was made, because there was partially coincided with COVID. So Miguel Gomez went on this grand tour himself with a small team, and while doing this, at some point COVID hit, so he couldn't, I think when he was in Osaka or something, he couldn't continue the journey, and then the rest of the film that he didn't actualize there, he had to do on set, which brings some, artifice into this entire project. And he juxtaposes black and white with color, and you have these moments of modernity that interfere every now and then with the historicity of the plot. And it's all very fascinating. I think one of the images that will stick is the Ferris wheel that is, fueled by men. They're I don't know where exactly, maybe in Shanghai or something, but there are these natives that work at a carnival, and to entertain the tourists and so on, they keep this Ferris wheel going by their own, through their own body. And I think this is a very striking image and concept, and the way Miguel Gomez here sort of reflects his own position when looking at this overall colonialist idea of the Grand Tour is very much embodied in this image. Yeah, there are a lot I could say about this film, but it's just also such a beauty. And of course, in the end, when the film sort of goes meta and we listen to Beyond the Sea, I'm totally taken in by this. So yeah, my number 3, Grand Tour by Miguel Gomez. I don't know if you have anything else to say on this film.
Something in retrospect, because I think we already discussed this film, right?
We did, yeah.
in the podcast, because I had difficulties. Like, I wanted to put this film somewhere because I think it's a really great. It's a great film. But as I said, there's so many films that that came up, like, that personally I liked more, even though it's, I think, objectively a better film than many of these small films that I put on my list. I was really interested by the fact that many people to whom I talked to thought this film was really colonialist in its depictions. Mostly people coming from those regions depicted in the film. But I think, at least for me, it was crystal clear that film was quite aware of what images it was appropriating. The fact that it was using these really stereotyped cultural signs, it was for me like, of course it's using them because it's kind of, it plays with them. It's like these images are never appropriated on a primary degree. There's always a second degree added through voiceover, through the artificiality. So I was quite struck by how people is accusing Grand Tour to be colonialist, whereas I think it's just way too self-aware, like in a good way, I mean. And yeah.
Anything you want to add to this? Or
yeah, the only thing I can really think of in terms of that is because I recently also heard, I mean, there are not many people, and it would have been interesting to hear what Lawrence has to say, but with regards to All We Imagine Is Light, that there are some people who also have, in a different sense, not necessarily colluding, but just in terms of this film was made and it doesn't have this self-reflective aspect, but in it, some people might say, oh, but this was made to be shown to a Western audience. Whereas I think Miguel Gomez's film is often pointing to, and it's very aware of it, but it's still trying to maintain this, I don't know, this wonder or this idea that perhaps can be critiqued of the exotic, the Orient, that which is not what we are familiar with. And then I get lost in understanding.
No, but yeah, but I think the fact that he couldn't go at the end to those places to film is a really interesting twist itself. Like the existence of the film itself is impeded by the fact that he couldn't go there.
Yeah.
So even if it was his intentions, the fate didn't allow him. So the inherent tension between this exoticism but not being able to go there is just for me a marvelous twist and coincidence. But
or maybe it is the fact sometimes to some degree that not being able to go somewhere thus fuels even more exoticism too. And I think that this duality is also very interesting. Or to even have the teams in China filming for on behalf of someone else.
And maybe Miguel Gomes is not happy, wasn't happy at all. Like we're just like interpreting, we're maybe projecting our interpretations on his intentions, but that's okay. I think that's the film allows that space, gives that space for meditation, I guess.
Great. So my number 3, Öykü, what is your number?
That is a really good coincidence as well, because my number 3 was Caught by the Tides.
I see.
Yeah, that's nice. Anyone else who has it on their list? No. I also heard, like as Lauren said, reservations regarding Caught by the Tides, but I the first time I watched it, I was already like in when we see this opening sequence, long introduction to Zhangke's world, is just I think basically mesmerized by what was waiting for me throughout the whole film. And I think my take on the film, which I repeated I think in many instances, be it in Turkish or English, is that recently lots of filmmakers are interested in making self-portraits or going back to their careers through one film or through many ways. And especially at Cannes, where we had Megalopolis, this really egocentric film, I thought Gia's, right? I can say Gia's proposition really interesting and also generous, because he kind of finds his own identity through others, through society, through his actors, through the grain, through the format of the films he uses. So basically, this is the footage he appropriates covers, I think, a period of more than 20 years, but focusing more on the period between still life and I think it's it's not Ashes at the Purest Light, but between 2001 and 2006. So he uses footage he didn't use, but also it's like a travelogue in time and space in China. And I think seeing changes, observing changes in people's faces, people demeanor, people, the landscape. I was just as I said, mesmerized by what's going on. And the ultimate part of the film is so touching and so desperate, both hopeful but also desperate in the way it shows us now today, and how human connection becomes gradually impossible. It was just so touching to see that the confrontation between two main characters. We can call them characters, I guess, because they basically never talk throughout the whole film, and it becomes even more meaningful with that ultimate part. And I think it's definitely a film that I will remember so strongly from this year.
Anything you want to add, Eliana?
It's interesting to me because I'm wondering also why I'm not so receptive, I guess, to this film, or if it has to do, because I find it's very interesting, but then on the emotional level, there was an absence, and I don't know if it's because I haven't seen as many Jia Zhangke films, but I find that in his usage of Zhao Tao as a type of avatar, in some sense, that this is very, he makes good films. There's no doubt about that. In the same way, though, Wang Bing too. But Wang being in a completely different way for how I guess I am receptive to to his cinema. But I guess it's also, having spent time in Asia, there's a different feeling, even though I wouldn't necessarily. So it's just filtered through me, I guess, really is the difference of receptivity. Because I find they capture something that is very important, and it's I like watching. But yet still, there's some disconnect with whatever it is that I either think I'm seeing or that I want to be seeing, or that I don't know, something happens, so I can't wind up at the end of the year saying, these two films. But I know that I enjoyed, whatever this means, that I was present for the time that I spent when I watched them.
I also have, maybe that's a different point, but I also have difficulties or reservations when I speak about films that take place in countries that I'm not quite familiar with their cultures or society, and that the only knowledge I have of them is through other works of art, like be literature, cinema. And whereas in the context of a film like Grand Tour, where the filmmaker is also in the same position as me, I think it's easier to talk about and like make assumptions or interpretations about the film. But here, I think this would be the same case as for Ceylan, like someone else, like from a foreign country, talking about Ceylan and the way he depicts Turkey. And I think it's the same thing goes for Zhangke and China, and the way a foreign audience talks about the film. I'm aware that there's a gap between those readings, and I kind of fear that I'm also falling into that pit, that I kind of react overzealously and maybe miss some things that people who grew and who lived through the realities that I just mentioned interpret differently than I, as a simple mere viewer, do.
I don't know. I also think it's still very important to be able to tap into marvel and wonder, even if it's not perhaps aligned with the politically correct.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
And what excites me most about this film is sort of this idea that you can trace history through fiction. You know, like you look back at the fiction work, you know, you shot without the intention of depicting history, but just, you know, by the virtue of doing it, it naturally
becomes.
Yeah. And I find this very fascinating. You know, it's not like Boyhood or something where you do that with that in mind. It just happens. As you go along. So yeah, I find that very fascinating.
How about you guys? What's your number 3?
My number 3 is Reyes by Lola Arias. So we're back in Argentina. Reyes is a musical drama in some sense, so maybe it would pair well with your Les Reines du Drame, which I haven't seen yet. Öykü. And it's a film where we are inside the reenactment of women and transgendered women who had been at one point incarcerated, and they are in a prison that's no longer used as a prison, and they are just expressing their stories and dancing and playing with the layering of what is true now, what is happening amongst the dynamic of the characters that are assembled. At some point, they are also to put on a show, which is how the film ends, I believe. And at different moments in time, these women express openly that which they have experienced, but in a way that doesn't engage with the normal narratives of violence that we hear or know about in prisons, either people who are incarcerated who are males or just in general. And there's this idea that the filmmaker is doing, which I find is also very fascinating, because the film came out of a series of workshops that she had orchestrated that I think to a degree. I don't even really know if they go on to this day. And that became a workshop. It became a form of theatrical outlet stemming from the idea of what do these people who are placed in prison or who do, whether they are supposedly guilty or not, how do they wind up spending their time, and also noting the inequality with which those who are transgendered men or transgendered women experience poor treatment and higher rates nowadays due to a law that's changed in Argentina to prosecute drug dealers, I believe. The women who, in some sense, due to collateral, or there's another word maybe, but the collateral or
proxy, I don't know.
or by proxy, are taken in and treated as if they are in equal right, as culpable or as have committed a crime as damning as
accomplices.
Yeah. So accomplices are also treated to the same degree that someone who's really pulling the strings for a larger crime might be. And so I thought what I ultimately liked the most about this film is that it made me feel, again, it's feeling for me, open, that the openness of these characters, the openness of these women, the ways in which, once again, I guess it's sort of similar in a sense to why I like Castration, Anthology, and maybe even Lazaro at Night to a degree. In Reyes, this idea of a form, or even Misericorde, but just a form of ideal is achieved within a very restrictive space. There's a little paradise to be found in prison, which is also visually played. That is actually the last scene of the film. And these liberations that come from a relative perspectives, because you cannot. What is freedom? Freedom to one person is very different to another person. And maybe in this sense too, in Wang Bing's Homecoming or Youth, that's that feeling that you get too, that I don't even know, can we even say, you earlier maybe said atrocious circumstances in which they're living, but I don't know if we can really even say that, or are we supposed to still say that even if they're smiling and sending each other cute voice messages in his film. And so for Reyes, there's a banger song, and it's just very simply beautiful, and people are exposed, but they're not done so in a vulnerable way. People are expressing themselves and their stories, but it doesn't follow the same narratives of stigmatization or confrontation that are often used to critique these people who identify with how they identify. And I appreciate that. Yeah.
And it doesn't neglect the systemic violence, but it sort of uses the form of the musical to imagine these utopian moments in which the antagonicity of the wards and the inmates could be transcended. And I think this is a very playful and a very effective way with little means, I'm sure. So yeah, I like that quite a lot as well.
From what I heard, it sounds quite like a anti-Emilia Perez.
Maybe. I still haven't seen it, so perhaps.
But yeah, so many musicals this year. Incredible. Okay, this leads us to my number 2. We're now all our second position at least, which for me is direct action. I don't know if that still appears. Öykü? Also your number 2? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to go on with this one?
No, please go on first.
Well, yeah, I really loved that movie. I knew very early on, in Berlin, I went to this pre-screening even before the festival with Guillaume Cailleau, who's Berlin-based. He had this little pre-screening, test screening to see if everything works out. And this was very very cute in itself. But yeah, this film, you think of direct action, you hear the title, you know something about the synopsis of, resistance against politics in France, about, there's, for instance, this airport that the government tried to push through in the Nantes region since the 60s or something. But the residents there, they have always been resilient. They have always found ways to confront this. And now if you just hear that, and, it's also about water preservation, whether the water can be used for the local industry or if it should be left alone for the people and not for the industry. And yeah, so people found a way to be resilient. And your first impulse might now be, oh, we are seeing, I don't know, street protests or something. We see people chanting and putting out paroles or something. No, this is not the case here. We rather see deceleration. We see people who try to find ways of resisting in deceleration, in anti-capitalist practices, in small-scale farming, in collaborating together. And this film is about 4 hours long or so. It has each shot takes about 5 minutes or so. There are 40 shots in the entire movie. And it has this great drone sequence that Lawrence already talked about. But yeah, they are very good, the duo, Ben Russell and Guillaume Cailleau, to find very effective angles toward this. It's also called direct action, but and I got in a bit of a argument with the directors when I interviewed, but I would rather claim, it's often about the indirectness, because they often show us something, but they don't focus on the people there. They try to protect them, so we don't see the people there. We hear them, we eavesdrop, and we see all the different aspects of this communal life depicted very slow. And it's like in a very good James Banning film, this film just makes you, it teaches you to look. It stays on scene so long. I love this scene, for instance, when they make the crepe. There are 5 or 6 crepe irons, and with each iteration of the movement, when the dough is put on the iron, the camera, there's this, what do you call it? The steam rises, and so for a moment we cannot really see what's going on, which of course reminds us of the camera that is in between us and the ongoings there. And I think the film has a lot of these small indicators that still sort of locate the filmmaker duo in there. And yeah, it's very hard to describe how this film mesmerizes one, but it certainly has mesmerized me, and I knew very early onwards that this would be one of my favorite films of the year, and it became that.
I also had a really personal fascination with this film by the fact that it shows the state of things after post-victory. I think it's the way it's also in the synopsis of the film, it's described in that way. What happens when there's a victory in the political sense, and what happens to the after the resistance, after the groups, after to communities, what happens to them? I mean, I grew up in a country where any form of political action, be in the streets or online, is always restricted or sanctioned. Seeing something, maybe it's a quite European and maybe even French thing to observe this kind of situations, that people can really achieve something through their resistance was such a fascinating and known idea to me. I think that my first reflex or reaction to the film was fascination. But also I think that state asks a question, then what? And I think it also shows after being on the streets, and especially if you know that representation of French politic resistance are always somehow related to a breaking things, with the yellow gilets jaunes and yellow vests. This recent imagery about the French action is always related to deconstruction, right? Some breaking things or rioting. But to seeing that there are also a different face to that reality was, I think, really important for me. And as we said with the periphery of the base, I think there's also this part of, you compared it to James Banning, we never lose the micro action, micro engagement within a small gesture of building something or making crepes. I mean, it's corny to say all action is political, maybe, but still it is somehow true to some extent in their lifestyle, at least. And another aspect I really liked is that, since you mentioned the camera, there's a self-awareness of the film, of their not belonging truly to that space. Like even they spend an awfully long time in that community. I think they make sure that the viewer knows that they don't fully belong to that community. Like they're observers, and there are some limits to them being there in that space. And I think it was a really important touch to highlight that through the two images in the film. Not necessarily like we did this, we that, but like the way they film people, things, actions is stating that, okay, we are in a position that is not necessarily as the same as the people living in that community. And you need to be aware of that, as if they were saying this to the viewer. But I also thought that what would especially American viewers would think of this film, because like when we describe it as it like that, it sounds like a sect, like a, this like a new agey sect kind of thing, right? But it's totally different from what that would be in United States. And maybe this is also like that's why this film would fascinate American people, but resonate more with European audiences and what they understand by political action. But I think it's a film that gives hope, and it's really important, like, to see that like something has been done in the past and it can be done again if the way, like, even at the end of the film there's a police intervention to the it's not a rally but the gathering. I think it's a film that still gives hope to the people, to the viewer. The outcome of the film for me was that, yeah, there's still things can be done, that we can do things, that we can change.
Yeah, as the American viewer, I suppose, of us three, I think when I watched it, it was this fascination existed, and then having some time away from it, the pessimism of perhaps, who knows, of being American or something kicked in, even though that hope, like you say, exists. And then in terms of practical matters, to see to what degree is such a community viable or accessible, the degree of sacrifice that goes into the time that would be spent. And that's what this film shows in its duration and in the generosity and all the energy that is needed for the community to subsist. Yeah, I think it's important ultimately to have this, but it's a very different view, because I don't know, like, what does it mean? Is this community as depicted, whether we are aware, which you say we are, that the directors were aware of how temporary their own presence was, and us too when we watch the film to a degree. But I guess maybe I just boil it down to pessimism in its lasting effects, and perhaps this fear that is that no longer an ideal for me, or is it even a potential, or is it a reference point for other people as well, as this too can be a possibility. And for that I'm grateful that the film can elicit those thoughts. However, I still don't know where to go with them once having them.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. That's even something I brought up in the interview, that it's of course you have this idea, but at the same time, isn't there some romanticism and nostalgia in that as well, just inherently, because there are certain things we just, that we are being offered by the production cycle in which we are embedded, and we don't want to, discard that. We don't want to live without many of the privileges we enjoy on a daily basis, which, however, would be difficult to uphold if we followed a life as it is depicted in the film. There's this tension, I think, that I feel towards this film. But to me, I'm not so much taken in by the politics of the film, but rather by the filmmaking of the film. But, your mileage may vary here. So Öykü's and my number 2, Direct Action by Ben Russell and Guillaume Cailleau, who, by the way, also, right, we have an American and we have a French filmmaker there. So we have those two perspectives as well. Eliana, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is We Are Inside by the Lebanese, perhaps based in Belgium, filmmaker. I'm not entirely sure where she's based right now.
I think she is.
Farah Kassam. And this was a film that did we all see?
No.
Okay.
But I know a lot about the film because we did a podcast. Like my friends did a podcast in Belfort.
Mm-hmm.
I was also like present with the filmmaker, so yeah, I would be able to contribute. And
this film, I remember Patrick saw it and was very enthusiastic about it, and he insisted very heavily that I see it. And there was a moment to do so on these hard seats in the lovely cinema in Armenia. The film it's not worth mentioning that it's rather long, but only for the seating. But the film is another film that I would describe as beautiful and dignified. And I think that this is a very difficult sort of meeting of space for a film to live in general. It's, if we are to say there's a premise, to some degree it's primarily documentary based. The filmmaker, who has spent most of, I think, her life doing film projects or working with the theme of her father, returns to Tripoli, where her father is an octogenarian or so, and this is around 2019, where the Lebanese revolution is going on, and she tries, in a way, to have closer contact with her father. Her father used to be a mayor or some political man, but more importantly is a poet, and is an active poet in a group of older men who are also poets. And so the daughter and the filmmaker tries to get closer by engaging in poetry and presenting her own poetry to her father, who is, in some respect, at the end of his life. I found it was just a very endearing father-daughter portrait that was filled with a lot of love and care, but also gracefully touched tensions without being devastated by those tensions that one might expect at the end of the life of a paternal figure, a real father, and the distress and frustration that one might have when you see someone who you love in a state both not able to really take care of themselves, but also sort of asking, in some sense, to be taken care of, while also trying to appeal and give life and find vitality in engaging in something that they will very stubbornly protect and determine is their way of doing something or their standard of quality, and that is the poetry. There were lots of humorous moments, and I found this film left me with a very, very sore and tender heart.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful. The father figure who's the poet. It's really funny and interesting to see this poetry club, how they convene regularly in the room behind a lawyer's office, where they meet. It's almost like hidden somewhere, and the father takes on this sort of classicist role within the club, which is really, it's only inhabited by men, but they are all rather on the progressive side, whereas the father, who's so central to the film and the protagonist's and director's life, He's more of the classicist, conservative. I think the film does it very smartly that the distance between father and daughter is established very early when we learn that the father is basically communicating through his forewords of his poetry to her, actually, but also to the world, where he sort of complains about his daughter being so westernized, but at the same time he's happy that she somehow happened to be successful in filmmaking. It's very concise, in depicting how distant they are, but also how they won't let loose of the bond that connects them. And also, this is a film, not to draw on a cliche, but it is a film about filmmaking because we sort of see how she evolves as a filmmaker. The film itself doesn't draw attention to it, but since this was shot over several years, we see how her aesthetics become more and more intricate, becomes more and more elaborate. The shots she uses at the beginning, it's sort of, amateurish, and it becomes more and more expressive, and it develops its own poetic language, I would say. And of course, at the same time, it's her becoming a poet over these years, because she goes into training, more or less, with her father, who is really this authoritative figure there. He also hosts these conventions, basically, where he presents his poetry, and they sort of workshop her poetry, and she becomes a member of the club and becomes respected there as well. And just another small thing, there is the absence of the brother or son, respectively. That's also noteworthy here, whose name is every now and then just mentioned, but then, so there is this sort of gap there in their life too. And I really like how this film involves us as well and points to its own making. I mean, there is this scene when we actually learn that the father, who has this biographical ties to politics, as Eliana noted, he has at some point stopped voting, and there's the scene where he basically asks her not to tell anybody that he casts always white ballots these days. And yeah, of course, she's not going to tell anyone, but we are seeing this. So she is sort of, there's some poetic truth to this notion, but at the same time, of course, it's not, this is a promise that cannot be kept, because it would also hinder her artistic project here of being actualized. So yeah, I think that's a very smart film, but overall it's just a very touching film. And at the same time, outside of this, I mean, it's called We Are Inside. Outside, there is the military parading, and there are conflicts on the streets going on. So it's also a dangerous place just to leave your apartment. So this reuniting with the father is also sort of, it's due to the circumstances that it happens in this way as well. So as well as the father's disease that Eliana mentioned. Yeah, it's a very touching film, and I would recommend it to anybody. Okay, this leads us to our number ones. Hooray! Who wants to start?
What is your number one, Öykü?
It's Jean-Luc Godard's Scenario. Oh, it's I don't know. Maybe I can be like a radical and say it's Jean-Luc Godard. Like, what can I say? No, you go first. No, should I?
I can go first because we already talked about Miséricorde. Yeah, no, my favorite film of the year is still Miséricorde, for all the reasons you mentioned earlier. There are little life lessons and little ways that the film can hit in different ways. Once again, there's so many, now just in talking, all these themes that are coming up, the idea of being away for a while, coming back, the idea of this desire and crime. And I mean, you can even make the argument now that it's become somewhat relevant. If we know someone might be guilty of a crime, do they still have the right to, if it's not technically, as the film puts it, in their nature to be a killer, do they still have the right to be amongst us? Do they still have the right to impose upon those who do love them that they hold the burden of silence, that they want rather to choose to have their present corporeal form in their daily life. I liked a lot of these little things too, in the both comedic way in which these characters that revolved around that village appeared, but also which is at one point explicitly said, by the one character, comically the priest, and how he has intentionally found a way to place himself on the path of the man with whom he actually does want to see. I think there was just a lot of heart and restraint that was placed in this film that shows this culpability or this guilt or this necessity also to be pardoned or forgiven, as miséricorde, the word, even suggests. And I think, ultimately, somehow it will last, even though I can't quite articulate all these things very well. And I found it just to be fresh. And for that, I guess it's my number one.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great pick. And seems like you can sign up for hire at the French Cahiers du Cinéma, who put it also at number one this year. Maybe if you... Should I go on, or do you want to...
No. I mean, I think it's a bit like a weird to put a short film on the top, like the first choice on the top 10 list. But I know, but it's also like as I said, this is not a perfect list. This is just my personal list, and I think Godard was like, he was someone who embodied the modern cinema, and I think this last. I hope it's last. I don't want any more like a Godard's last something. I hope this is the last one, but I believe that it is, because this was his wish to be. This is a short film about a film that he wanted to make, but he didn't end up making it. So it's like as it is described in the film. I have to say, it's not a resume. It's like a condensed version of what was supposed to happen in the film. So
a scenario.
Yeah. And actually there's also a companion piece to that, because I'm still since they have the similar titles, and in the second film he explains how he wants it to be, but how he wants this other film to Fabrice Aragnon and Jean-Paul Bataille, but these are two different films. So he's not explaining how scenarios should be. Anyway, I watched it at Cannes, and there's also, I think, why the reason it is touching and important is that it ends with a footage where we see Godard sitting on his bed, and it's the day before he's going to engage in assisted suicide. And knowing that it's going to happen, oh my God, it's so hard to talk about this film. I'm sorry, I can't articulate my thoughts, because I feel like the reason why it touched me appeared retrospectively, knowing that this scene will appear. After second or third watch, knowing that this scene will be there, kind of made me even more connected to this film, I'd say. The first time it's just a wow. And then it's just becomes more, it just grows. And especially the second part of the film is called MRI? No, IRM? Yeah, MRI is the English one, right? The
MRI, yeah.
So we hear these sounds of medical sounds in the background all the time. So as if it's just this impending something will happen, mm-hmm. while his this fragility in his body and psyche is present all over the film, even though it's a typical Godard montage of images from his previous work or other appropriations from writers, philosophers, and other filmmakers. I think there's this fragile quality in the film itself. This something will happen. Either it's me knowing that what will come at the end of the film, or the meaning itself. Like it's just become this circular thing that is just keep playing in my head. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah, totally. And I mean, this is also unavoidable, right? I sometimes think people look for the film that works out of itself, whereas I think this is a total impossibility. We always bring our own context into the film, and it will only enhance our experience, I think. And what you're saying there, I think just enables you to connect with it so much more profoundly.
And I also feel sorry that now, like, because the film is, I think, digitally available only through NFTs, and it's kind of sad that it's such a personal film, such a like a touching film, is also like surrounded with this discourse and discussions about like how a film should be promoted. Because I think people are right about this is a personal film, and I don't think I don't know whether he'd be okay with the way they chose the film to be distributed, but I hope it will be accessible to anyone for whom Jean-Luc Godard is someone important, and in like as I said, like he was the embodiment of the modern cinema, and I think people deserve to get an access to this touching and fragile work of art. This adieu. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was very moving. I thought so too, and I was glad because the last film that I saw that played in Cannes 1 or 2 years ago, I just found so inaccessible. I just had a hard time with it, Whereas this...
Funny Wars.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, I'm not saying it's bad. I couldn't wrap my head around it, I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't connect to it. Whereas this is a very visceral and it's very, like, even on a non-intellectual level, it's very easy to connect with it, and I think that's where stems the strength of it from as well. Yeah, and the programming at TIFF was great too, because it was programmed together with John Smith's film, right, which was also a very touching one, reflecting upon his career and so on. Yeah. Anything you want to add, Elle, or? Okay, then my number one film is Tu me abraces by Matias Pinedo. And yeah, I love this film. I have recently seen it for a second time, and this love didn't dissipate. It just was solidified, I thought. Yeah, I think, to keep it short, this is a film that, in whatever small steps you may qualify, helps evolve cinema. I truly think so. It helps you as a viewer to understand the cinematic language and insists upon your active viewing in order to create meaning. I think it's just very inspiring. It also makes you reflect upon how literature can be adapted into cinema and become then its entirely different thing, its entirely distinguished, unique entity. And also, it insists on openness and possibility toward the end. It suggests our involvement, or it implies us in creating an ending that the film itself won't reveal. It's rather in us of finding this. I know this is all very abstract, but it is also an abstract film in a sense. It's, yeah, Eliana, maybe you can talk more about the text it's based on by Cesare Pavese.
It's based in a sense on the text by Cesare Pavese. I believe he wrote the text after he wrote The Beautiful Summer, for which I believe he achieved a very prestigious prize in the literary world just prior to his suicide, which is also mentioned in the film. This film then takes the characters who then rename themselves. So this is a thing that you also really liked, Patrick. They use their phones as a means of simply renaming the contact to then interact via text message to one another as they enter dialogue that's already been written by Pavese, but also in another sense, there's also an imaginary, the Sappho character. So one person is Sappho and the other person is Britomart. And yeah, the film is just very beautiful. I remember when I first saw it, I thought, I actually don't want to talk about this film. And it's very rare that I feel that way, even though you were next to me and you were very excited and you said, "Oh, that was so beautiful." I just wanted to be like, shh, like, you're ruining it
So
already,
precious.
even though this is also an absurd reaction to have as well. But yeah, it felt that precious in that sense. And I don't know where people will be able to see it, but there's also, yeah, it seems this year we needed some cinema that was just beautiful, or that was just delicate, or that was introspective, or that, I don't know, like little phrases, like what is desire that vanishes.
I think Pinheiro's work will be really valuable, as you said, Patrick, as a whole, like as a body of work, to understand the process of filmmaking, adaptation, character building, influences. And in Tuma Brasas, I think when I try to like speak and talk about certain things that are visual and textures, I feel like they're like escaping me. Like I have the visuals in my head, like I can visualize them, but when I try to put them into words, as if their beauty is escaping me. Do you know what I mean? Like I remember this 16, or I think it's 16 millimeter, right? Or Super 8. The texture of the pages of a book that is like a not wrapped, but like folded, and that the breeze of summer breeze that is kind of like making the pages like a like you, when you try to like talk about these things, they just like it's like a evaporate.
Yeah, it's fleeting.
Yeah. And their real beauty is when you visualize them. So I think that's a film that has stronger impressions on the imagination than in the written text. Like even when I was trying to write about it, I had like difficulties putting things in the world, and maybe that's the accomplishment of the film, because it is actually based on a literary work. And to transcend that quality and leave a visual impression instead of more visual impression than the literary is, I think, really a strong accomplishment, I guess.
I'm not entirely sure if this is accurate, but maybe Öykü can speak to that. But I heard in his filmmaking process, and I'm not sure if it's always the same, but that often he shoots and then he goes back to the drawing board, he reshoots, and he goes in this sort of cyclical manner in which there's no set storyboard per se or direction, or okay, we're gonna just do it within like 1 week, and but rather there's this kind of, oh, we look at what has been done, we explore again, then we return back, and then we return back to the camera.
It's also, we can also sense that in the film, you know, the sequence where it repeats the cycle with the shots, the sink, you know, the woman at the door, trying to force the door. That maybe also repetition is itself embedded in the making of the film.
Yeah, and how small alterations might change our understanding of this then.
The word and the image is one, and then we hear it, and then slowly they peel apart. We don't hear the word anymore, but the order has been recreated. And so the word that we hear is no longer in the right phrase, which I think is it's so simple, but it's very effective.
Yeah.
I don't know what else. It's funny to end on a film that two people don't really want to talk about. No, I'm kidding. For the fact that it's so beautiful.
But I think that wraps it up for us. Thank you so much, first of all, for doing this. Öykü, would you have another 5 minutes? I have this little game.
Yes.
Okay. So the rules are very easy. I read a list of films that come out in 2025, and you give me a yay or nay.
Okay.
Okay?
Oh.
That's all.
Let's go.
Okay. So for you as well, Eliana, of course, you say yay or nay. You together, okay? So, there we go. Films that will most likely appear in 2025. Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17, starring Robert Pattinson and Stephen Young, among others?
I don't know. I don't know.
I
Come
mean-
on, yay or nay? We only have yay or nay.
Yay, I'll go see it.
Yay.
Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later.
Nay.
Yeah, I would probably also say nay.
Joseph Kosinski's F1 Formula One with Brad Pitt.
Nay.
Nay.
Park Chan-wook's No Other Choice.
I don't know.
No.
Nay, because there's no other choice.
Maggie Gyllenhaal's sophomore feature, The Bride, which is a remake of the 1935 film Bride of Frankenstein.
Yay.
Yeah, I'd probably say yay too.
Spike Lee's Highest to Lowest, the adaptation with Denzel Washington, A$AP Rocky, and Jeffrey Wright.
Yay.
Yay.
Yorgos Lanthimos' Bugonia with Emma Stone.
Nay.
I would still see it. Yay.
Christian Petzold's Miroir number 3.
Yay.
Paula Bear.
Paula. Okay, yay. So simple.
Lynn Ramsey, Die My Love with Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson.
Yay.
The Drama by Christopher Borgli with Robert Pattinson and Zendaya.
Is he in everything this upcoming year? I'll say nay. Just because why not?
Oliver Hermanus, The History of Sound, starring Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor.
Yay.
Yay.
That was, by the way, the guy who made the Ikiru remake a few years ago at Sundance. Benny Safdie, The Smashing Machine, starring Dwayne Johnson.
Yay.
Yay.
Josh Safdie with
Oh my god.
Marty Supreme, starring Timothée Chalamet, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Tyler, the Creator.
Yay for me.
Eliana?
Let's see the film.
Yay or nay?
Yeah, nay.
Okay, nay. The new PTA, The Battle of Bacton Cross, starring Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yay.
Yay.
Ari Aster, Addington, featuring Joaquin Phoenix, Emma Stone, Austin Butler.
Nay.
I want to say yay for Austin Butler, but it's not an enthusiastic yay. It's like yay. Whatever. Yay, whatever.
Okay. And Noah Baumbach, Jay Kelly, with George Clooney, Adam Sandler, Laura Dern.
Can't tell.
Yay or nay? Yay or nay?
Yay.
I'll say nay.
Okay. Chloe Zhao's Hamnet, starring Paul Mescal and Jessie Buckley. It's about Shakespeare's wife.
Yay.
Nay.
I'll say yay.
The new Kugonada, A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, starring Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie.
Yay.
Yay.
Jim Jarmusch, Father, Mother, Sister, Brother, Kate Blanchett, Charlotte Rampling, Adam Driver are among the cast members.
Yay.
Yay.
Richard Linklater, number 1. Blue Moon, starring Ethan Hawke, Margaret Qualley, Andrew Scott.
Nay.
That's not the Nouvelle Vague film,
That's
right?
not.
That's yay.
Nay.
Richard Linklater, number 2, Nouvelle Vague,
Nay.
I'll say nay as well.
about the production of Breathless by Godard.
Oh, that sounds somewhat... Okay, I'll say nay still.
Kelly Reichardt, The Mastermind, starring Josh O'Connor and Alana Haim.
Yay.
Yay.
Cooper Rife's The Trashers, starring again Cooper Hoffman.
Yay.
Yay.
Greg Araki, I Want Your Sex, starring Olivia Wilde, Cooper Hoffman, and Charlie XCX.
Oh my god. Now
brilliant.
now when you put it all like this, then I guess yes. I like
Yes.
Araki.
Yay.
Julian Schnabel's In the Hand of Dante, starring Martin Scorsese, Oscar Isaac, Al Pacino, and John Malkovich. It's about the manuscript of Dante, like the Inferno that somehow appears on the New York black market, and now a scholar has to authenticate it or not. I think that's
I'll
the premise.
say yay.
Yay. That's a fiction film,
Yes.
right? Okay. Wow.
Ethan Cohen, Honey Don't, I don't know whom it serves at the moment.
Nej.
Sounds like Don't Worry Darling in the title, but not really. I don't know.
Yay or nay?
I'll say yes.
Okay.
Yay.
Vegan Resurrection.
I don't know.
Yay!
I'll say nay.
Okay. Joachim Trier, Sentimental Value, starring Renate Reinsve.
Yay.
Nej.
Okay. Catherine Bigelow, Untitled Project.
Nay.
Nej.
James Gray, Paper Tiger.
Nej.
Yeah, nay.
Jonah Hill's sophomore feature, Outcome.
Nej.
I'll say nay too.
Wes Anderson, The Phoenician Scheme, starring Tom
Nay.
Hanks, Cumberbatch, blah, blah, blah.
Yay!
Nay.
Yay!
Radu Schude's Dracula Park, for which,
Yeah.
Yay!
for which, do you guys know the log line of that one?
No, tell. Oh, well, I don't. Maybe. Do you?
No.
It's called Make Dracula Great Again.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Julia Ducournau's Alpha.
Yay.
Yay!
Andrei Zvyagintsev, Jupiter.
Who is
Yay!
Andre?
The guy who made Loveless.
Yes.
Oh, I haven't seen Loveless.
And
The Return.
Mhm.
Leviathan. Yep.
Yeah.
Kirsten Johnson's Sontag, so a film about Susan Sontag. She's the
Yay.
filmmaker who made Camera Person a few years ago.
I'll
Eliana?
just say yay.
Okay.
Yay.
Abel Ferrara's American Nail, starring
Nay.
Willem Dafoe and
Nay.
Asia Argento.
Nay.
Nay.
Valeska Griesebach, The Dreamed Adventure.
Yay.
Yay.
Nathan Fielder's Checkmate. It's about the
Yes.
scandal on...
The chess.
yeah, exactly.
You mean the butt plug
Yeah.
incident? Oh my
The
God.
butt plug thing that was never confirmed.
Yes.
And, of course, the last film that we don't know anything about the status of is Terrence Malick's The Way of the Wind.
Nay.
I don't have enough information to know.
I hate Terrence Malick.
Never
And
seen
on-
a Terrence Malick.
And on these positive notes, we end it here. That's our little, outlook for 2025.
Thank you. But we don't even know what you're looking forward to out of that
Well,
list.
We'll
Yeah.
find that out as we go along 2025.
All right.
Give me 5 nays among them, like the strongest nays.
Oh, the strongest
Of
nays. Okay, let's see. Chloe Zhao, Ari Aster, Christopher Borgli. That's 3, right? Perhaps Joseph Kosinski, the F1, and the Danny Boyle, 28 days later. Yeah, those are my nays for now.
By the way,
Oh, yep.
By the way, about Joachim Trier, I found it interesting, because I remember, I remember enjoying The Worst Person in the World when I watched it, and then time passed, and I feel like it's just I don't like it anymore. But I don't know what happened. I don't like it as much as I did. I don't know. Maybe I grow old. I grow older. I don't know.
I understand what I saw the film twice, and I also had it went through my system a little bit too.
Yeah. Now it's just okay. No.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of these films that while I'm watching it, I really enjoy it and I really see the strengths of it. But as I reflect on it, it sort of loses its charm on me, But I feel like if I were to see it tomorrow again, I would probably like the viewing experience. I just don't know if it would have a lasting impact on me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the main character was really insufferable at the end, and I kind of supported the other guy, the guy played by Anders Danielsen Lee. I kind of felt for him more after so many time passed. Now I feel like I remember more of him fondly than I remember Julie.
And I like the episode about the when he is attacked by the media for his
For his
writing
depiction,
of
his
graphic novels or something. Yeah, I like this entire rendering of cancel culture and so on. I found that one of the more interesting parts of the film. Yeah. Anyway, that's the time. So yeah, thank you very much for this, and hope to see you next year.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Öykü. And in absentia, Lawrence.
It's such a pleasure to be able to talk in a lengthy way about the films that I liked, and it's so eye-opening with you guys. And thank you for your amazing recommendations with Reyes, Lazaro at Night, and Castration, which I haven't seen. I mean, I hope I haven't missed anything, because I knew about We Are Inside before, but these films, like, thank you for recommending, and I'll definitely try and catch up them as soon as possible. And see you next year.
Bye bye.